All right, everyone. Welcome to my presentation, my book report on Hanging Out, Messing Around, and Geeking Out by Mizuko Ito. It's a book about youth and how they interact with technology and new media. Let's get started. So a little bit about the author. This woman here, Mizuko Ito, is the project lead on this book, and I'll get more on that in a bit, but she's a professor of cultural anthropology at UC Irvine, and believe it or not, her emphasis is on young people and their interaction with technology. So she was the lead on this project. She had three assistant investigators who helped her compile all the information for this, but that's not all. Um, so this here is just a list of people whose names are on the cover um, of the book. It's not even an exhaustive list of people who contributed to the book. And this is uh, the highest quality image of the cover that I could find. And you can see it says 10th anniversary edition. So just putting that in context, this was research done in the late 2000s, kind of around a time, or mid to late 2000s, where MySpace and Facebook were still being talked about as if they were equal or comparable, or still in that space. So MySpace was still relevant back when this was being written. So just have that context as a large grain of salt for what I'll be talking about and what the book talks about. So I call it a book because that's how I read it in book form, but it's really more of like a collection of academic journals. It's not written like super academia-y, but it is a pretty dense read and has a lot of subsections and all these different contributors that provide a bunch of different perspectives, but they're all aimed at the same goal, which is stated here. Um, what you can see on the screen is a really academic way of talking about their mission statement. It's how they say it in the book. But essentially, it's just talking about how there's a lot of arguments about how um, technology is being used by young people and how much it should be used, if it should be used, things like that. And this book is meant to just provide a source of research, concrete stuff that allows people to have something to look at when they're discussing these things instead of just bickering back and forth. So the book is organized into these 7 sections. The chapters on like friendship, intimacy, and families are focusing on how technology is changing how these relationships develop, and how even like the definition of some of those words are being changed, mostly friendship, and I'll talk about that later as well. And then the chapters like creative production and work are talking about how technology are changing the ways that young people engage with creative works, and then even work, as more and more millennials, I guess, were entering the workforce, and now guess we can even say Zoomers are starting to work via computers. Even little kids now are all using Zoom to go to elementary school. So there you go. So talking about the digital creation, so the Mizuko Ito, she actually she wrote this chapter herself, and she gave this anecdote about a kid who was inspired by George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and how they have their own production companies. And so he decided he would make his own production company. And just like you'll see the LucasArts logo or Amblin Entertainment at the beginning of any movies produced by Steven and George, he created his own production company name, and he made a logo out of Legos, covered it in oil, and lit it on fire. And that rolls before each of the shorts that he puts on YouTube. I was not able to find his channels. I searched as much as I did, and I just have this low quality image of Legos used to make fire. But this chapter talked about how, with wider distribution and access to other people's work, so you can get your work out and you can absorb a bunch of other people's content. This is kind of similar to a conversation we had in Kimball's class about, is film school even worth it, as like all this filmmaking technology and skill and knowledge becomes more and more accessible to the average Joe. Um, and because just like this boy, I think his name was Max, you can create your own shorts and put them out there to the world to get feedback, and you can just keep making movies and learning that way. And then more of the social aspect, talking about friendship. Uh, Another anecdote by a different author, this time in the book, talked about how little kids will often like solidify and verify their relationships with their friends by asking straight up, "We're friends, right?" And he goes on to say how young people nowadays aren't having that conversation. Um, the social ritual for establishing friendship is a friend request on Facebook or a follow on Instagram. Um, and it talks about some issues and benefits of social media, talking about friends lists and how they're primarily used as like address books for a lot of people. Like for me, I don't interact with a whole lot of people on social media, but I am comforted by the fact that I know that I have a resource that has a way for me to get in contact with people. Like when I know that something big is going on in their life, I can, give my congratulations and stuff. But yeah, it's mostly just a way for me to have their information. Then one of the problems that they talked about with social media was inflating popularity. So that's like people who go out and just like send a bunch of friend requests out into the ether and then accept any and all friend requests that come to them, just to have that number on their profile as big as possible, because there's some gratification in that. And I think that a lot of us know that that's problematic. Um, but yeah, and then the other thing it talked about was how establishing relationships is now dependent on friend requests, and this changes how we approach our whole social structure as a society. So basically, he talks about like, when is it okay to reject a friend request, or is it okay to reject a friend request? Like I know for me personally, there are people that I even know in real life who I have rejected their friend requests because I try and keep my social media um, pretty personal, and I don't want that to even be shared with everyone that I know. Um, Whereas some people, they don't want to reject friend requests because they are worried about seeming mean, or how they would feel bad if someone rejected their friend request. So of course I'm going to accept everyone else's friend request. So yeah, just talked about how social media has complicated and is changing the way that we look at friendship, which I thought was really interesting. So at the end of the day, though, I think this book, it so talking about the pros and cons of technology and how it's affecting the development of young people, I think the overall tone of the book still comes across as very pro technology. In the conclusion, they explicitly state that technology is an integral part of young people's development now, and it's only going to get more and more integrated into society. And I think if we look back 10 years to when they were doing this research and see how much more integrated technology has become, I think we can see they were right there. Um, and they also advocate the inclusion of technology in educational situations and settings, because it is how the world works now, and it's how young people interact with the world. Um, so, yeah, that is my report. Thank you.